Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and political correspondent, and with me today is a guest who is running for the State Assembly, and his name is Darrel Laumann. Darrel, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
So Darrel, you are a candidate for the 30th Assembly District, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
And well, before we get into why you're running and necessarily your qualifications, I'd like to find out a little bit more about you as a person. First of all, you're running as a Democrat, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
And I asked you off camera whether you're a party member, and you said you are, but only recently. Is that right?
Yeah, recently I did join the Democratic Party. I've been I like to consider myself very moderate in a lot of my views, and I've been that way for many years.
Okay. So if you're a moderate, why pick the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party, which seems to have a higher, following in St. Croix County?
Well, locally, the issues that the Democratic Party of Wisconsin and specifically St. Croix County and Pierce County are strong with are issues that I am also I feel strongly about.
Okay. Well, before we get into those issues, first of all, background, you look fairly young, but how old are you?
I will be 40 this fall.
Okay. And are you married?
I am. I am married to my wife, Kirsten, and we're expecting our daughter also this fall as well.
All right. Yeah, the election happens to be November 4th, so is the baby going to come first? Or
the due date's going to be October 11th, so
Okay.
It's going to be a very busy fall for us.
It sounds like it. And, well, tell me about where you were born and raised.
Well, I was born and raised on a small family farm in Minnesota. It was a dairy farm. We had 60 to 70, active milking cattle at any time.
And where in Minnesota?
Well, if you're familiar with where Watertown, Minnesota is, it's kind of out in the suburbs, or out in the countryside outside of Watertown, Minnesota, which is close to Waconia,
Okay.
which gets a little bit larger and a little bit more recognizable. Long Lake is another one as you start coming in towards the cities.
Okay. And so you went to high school where?
I went to high school at Watertown Mayor High School,
All right.
which was a combined rural high school.
Sure. And then what did you do after high school?
Well, after high school, I briefly attended the University of Wisconsin at River Falls, where I played football and
What position did you play?
I was an offensive center.
Okay. And so you played football at UWRF, and how many years were you at River Falls then?
It was just the 1 year.
All right. And then what did you do?
After that, I went into the working. I got a job. I started making income, and I spent some time at a temp agency. And shortly after that, I started getting involved in the transportation industry. I started out just by unpacking a truck and unloading a truck, and then I turned into driving for that company later on.
Okay. So you were involved in transportation, and then I understand you went back to school and got a degree. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I went back to school and obtained my degree in information technology.
All right. Information technology, short for IT.
IT.
And I think a lot of companies that have, more than 50 employees have IT specialists because how dependent we are on computers and so forth. So your employer, though, is who?
I currently work for the state of Minnesota.
Okay. And in what capacity? How are you using your IT degree?
Well, I'm an IT team lead for the state of Minnesota. The service desk at the Minnesota Department of Health is where I currently work.
Okay, Department of Health. All right. Well, so you're married with a child on the way, and do you have any other relatives in the county, in St. Croix County area? Or
No, my family is mostly from Minnesota, Kansas. My parents live in Hawaii right now, which is interesting. They've been there for over 10 years.
If my folks moved to Hawaii, I'd like to visit them frequently, but I've never been to Hawaii, so hopefully you'll get that chance. How long have you lived in St. Croix County then?
Almost 20 years. I've been here since '93.
Since '93, okay.
That's when I went to school in '93, and then I got a house in '94, so 20 years.
Okay. And all that while then commuting into Minnesota to work?
All that while working, well, not all that while. I worked worked several companies in Hudson, transportation industry again. There was LCI, Airlight, and Valley Cartage were some companies I worked for.
But you currently live then in which school district?
New Richmond.
New Richmond School District, okay. So, from New Richmond area, and talk a little bit about your qualifications. You mentioned your education and the career. Is there any special training or skills that you've picked up along the way that would serve you well as a state legislator?
Well, some of the things I've involved with other organizations would be I'm a volunteer coach for kids martial arts, and also I'm a member of Toastmasters too. So that's some of the other organizations I've been a member of.
Certainly with Toastmasters and public speaking, that's a pretty important skill to have. So, well then, begs the question though, why would you want to run for state office? As low as politicians score on likability scales and polls and so forth, why would you want to get involved in state politics?
Well, I believe it's something everyone should do, get involved with politics at some level. It really does open up your eyes as to what's happening that can affect you locally in your community as well as your state that you live in. And it's something that I feel strongly about.
All right, well, speaking of feeling strongly about things, are there issues that you want to particularly promote in your campaign, and then if elected, once you're down in Madison?
Well, some of the local issues that I'd like to see addressed are, like, for example, our infrastructure here in St. Croix County. I think it could be improved, and I think it should be improved. As far as roads, and more importantly, broadband. Being an IT professional, I think that our access to the internet is something that is important, that everyone should have, and it should be a decent connection.
Do you think that we haven't spent enough in that area to get that expanded? How would you see, what's the state's role in that?
I would like to see at least some opportunity for local municipalities to be able to upgrade, maybe with state assistance if they need it, okay, or however it can be done. But we really do need to increase that. I mean, even businesses, small businesses, that rely heavily on that access of information.
All right. You're saying it shouldn't be limited just to the higher population metro areas then?
Well, yeah. New Richmond is very slow, comparatively speaking, to Hudson, for example, where you have more choice.
Okay. You mentioned the infrastructure. Another thing you have on your cards for Laumann for State Assembly is supporting small business and entrepreneurs. That sounds good. Do you have some examples of how you want to create careers and support families through small business?
Well, I believe that your small business owners and your entrepreneurs really are your economic engine for the state. They really do drive the economy. I would like to see some of the same opportunities that are given to out-of-state businesses and larger businesses to the small businesses. Why can't they have some of the incentives and help that other established businesses are receiving?
Okay, and so you're particularly referring to, I think, some of Governor Walker's initiatives for trying to lure businesses from neighboring states and giving them big incentives, and you're saying maybe we should be looking within our borders to
grow in those businesses from within, our own businesses that are invested in our community,
okay,
instead of trying to bring some in from out of state.
Or at least a mix of that, or do you think that the priority is reversed?
There's always a mix. You don't want to say, no, we don't want to welcome any business from out of state. You're going to become a very stagnant state soon.
But do you think there ought to be a level playing field?
There needs to be a level playing field.
So then the third issue, it says building a strong community is the best defense against the growing drug problem. And as we tape the segment tonight, there's going to be a community forum, kind of an update of what's being addressed here in Hudson with the different deaths that have occurred, over the last couple years, unfortunately. So what do you see a strong community? What do you mean by that, and how would legislation be able to assist that?
I would like to see stronger enforcement of our current drug laws. I'd like to see, for example, I heard someone once say, I can't remember his name, he was another candidate for office, and I'm sure after the taping I'll remember his name, but he said that an addict who is addicted to heroin, who is in jail, is someone who's on the road to recovery. Okay. At least they're going to live. And that's...
So you wouldn't be in favor of decriminalization of some of the classes of drugs, marijuana and other things that some states have gone towards?
Well, I'm more focusing on the narcotic drugs. I mean, marijuana is legal. I mean, medical marijuana is definitely something that I think should be a little bit more relaxed on. Okay. But some of more your narcotics are that's the issue. There's a difference in my mind between some of those drugs.
Okay. And you think that when it comes down to it, sometimes jail is the best answer then for people who are pushing these drugs or using them?
You're definitely using. I mean, you'll at least be identified as someone who needs some help.
Okay. So those, you've got supporting growing communities by putting families first, another motto on your card anyway. And do you see how those communities could be getting supported by Madison? Any specific legislation in mind in that regard that we haven't already addressed, or maybe add to what's been addressed?
Well, I'd like to see. I mentioned, at the start of getting help. At least if you've been arrested, at least you're not going to overdose that night. I would like to see a little bit more support for the people who are addicted and the people who need that help. It's something that helps them out to get them on the path to recovery.
One of the items that I think might get addressed tonight, at least it was addressed within the last year, when actually one of your opponent, Dean Knutson, was bringing some people in the area to talk about this, was the idea of decriminalize or not going after people who call in 911 and so forth. Are you supportive of the efforts that have been made already for what's been done to try and ease the impact of the heroin and other opiates?
There has been a lot that's been done recently, and I think it could go farther. I think there's more that can be done, and there's not just one path to help out people who are addicted to heroin, and especially the families that are affected, because it's not just the person who's addicted that suffers; it's the family members and the friends of that person as well.
I think the lack of treatment facilities in the immediate area is another. There are more opportunities over by Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls area, but not here in Hudson. Is that something you'd like to see change?
That's what I alluded to earlier. Is I would like to see more being done especially for this area.
Okay. Well, how about, let's assume if you were elected and you went down to Madison, what would be some of the first things that you would address down there?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, beside what we already talked about, I would like to see a little bit more for our county workers and our state workers. Like Act 10, I believe, really did hurt them. Okay. There's a lot of things that, it's the smaller items that isn't so publicized that affects them, like their seniority, their collective bargaining, the ability for them to be represented.
Okay. Were you necessarily opposed to state workers or and school district employees paying for part of their health care, paying at least a share of their retirement contributions?
Well, when you start taking benefits away from people, benefits that they've been relied on and they've been working for many years, it's going to be a negative impact. If there was some change that needed to be done, it should have been looked at, it's a little bit looked at on a large scale, not just focused on one area. Okay. Like our county workers.
All right. Well, that's one difference then between you and Representative Knutson then is that you would not have supported Act 10, and in fact you would
not have
work towards reversing at least parts of it. Is that would that be accurate, or would you like to reverse the whole thing?
That would be accurate. It needs to be done. You can't just come out and say, okay, Act 10 right now, gone. I mean, think of the impact that's already happened.
Okay.
I would like to see Act 10 reversed, but I want it done in a way that's not going to cause more turmoil for the county workers that has been affected by it.
On the other hand, there's some benefits that have assisted, like school districts and their budgets and so forth, and how the insurance freedom for how to choose insurance plans and so forth. That could have reversing that completely, going the other way. That could have adverse impacts as well.
Which is why it needs to be looked at. Everything needs to be looked at carefully, and I think that Act 10 needs to be repealed.
Okay. What would be another area where you've seen Representative Knutson? I mean, voting. Is there another issue that you would have not agreed with him or have a difference with him on?
Well, we mentioned the drug issue. He's done some work towards helping it out, but I think I mentioned earlier that there should have been more.
Okay. Well, there's some issue with different states, and I think in Wisconsin was one of them that rejected the federal funding under the Affordable Care Act. Is that, I mean, where would you have stood on that issue as far as federal funds, accepting federal funds and paying for aspects of Badger Care?
I believe we should have accepted the federal funds, and I would like to see that actually, if it still can be done, I'd like to see that happen.
Okay. Maybe now it's too late, but we had, high-speed rail was another issue, and I think there was $800 billion, or it was $800 million, excuse me, a large sum of money anyway that would go towards that system that was ended up being rejected and sent back to Washington. Is that something that you would have supported, is the rejection of those funds as well, or would you have had a different stance?
I think we should have. I mean, the high-speed rail is something that I think has been working on for many years. It's been one of those issues that's just been floating out there that a lot of people agree it's good, but it never really goes anywhere. I would have liked to have seen it. Minnesota, for example, has an excellent light rail system that is very beneficial, especially for people who work in St. Paul and want to get to Minneapolis, or work in South, Bloomington.
Okay.
It's a public transportation system that I would have liked to have seen here.
Well, do you have any other stances on, particularly revenue? I mean, taxes is a subject that people always want lower taxes, but then it comes down to which taxes, and we've seen some shifting of that in this state away from businesses and giving them incentives toward, I guess, the others that pay taxes would be people who buy things in the sales tax. And there's some pressure on increasing the sales tax and decreasing income tax, for instance. Where do you stand on any of these changes in our revenue structure and any tax shifting that might go on in this state?
I've always said I like things that make sense to me. And our tax system does not make sense to most people. I would like to see it straightened out a little bit and, something that just makes sense. And as far as increasing taxes, sure, that helps pay for some things, but then you're putting the burden on the people who pay those taxes. That's really not going to help out matters either.
All right, so you're not necessarily in favor of any big tax reforms. I know that that's an issue in some of the campaigns going on. Haven't paid a lot of attention yet to the gubernatorial campaign, but there's been some rumblings there as well as far as reforming tax. But is that anything that's high on your priority list?
If it's high, if it's something that people here they feel passionate about, it's something I'll look into and kind of learn the issue and see what's happening. It's like a lot of things where, where I work at IT, you may not be an expert on that issue, but by the time you solve it, you will be.
Okay. So is there, you want to go ahead and give a plug? Do you have a website and or a Facebook page that people could visit?
I do. I have a website, which is laumannforoffice.com.
And that's Laumann.
Correct.
Foroffice.com.
Foroffice.com.
All right. And is there also similar, just type in Laumann for Office in the...
If you search Laumann for Office in Facebook, otherwise it's that, facebook.com/Laumann for Office, I believe, is the...
It says Laumann for Assembly.
For Assembly, thank you.
Right.
It's
Yep.
Laumann for Assembly.
All right, very good. So, great. Anything else that you want to add as far as, letting people know who you are and where you stand on the issues? I know that you've been in some parades and getting your name out that way. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you feel is important for folks to know about you?
Well, I think we touched on a lot of the issues that are important to me. We've touched on infrastructure. We've talked about the issue with drugs here in, the heroin problem specifically, and my support on small business, or how I feel about small business.
And speaking of small business, I don't know if we talked about it on air, but off air, and I did visit your Facebook page. I know prominent in there on your website anyway is your background being raised on a dairy farm, I understand. And were you one of several siblings, or who was doing the work on this family farm?
Well, I have one brother who actually still owns the farm after my parents had moved to Hawaii.
Okay.
And my brother's still there. It's become less of a dairy farm, more of a beef farm and cash crop farm.
Okay. So definitely grew up with ties to agriculture and understand how important that is to our economy here then. Anything you want to add regarding that then?
Well, I think that agribusiness has definitely been something that is strong in Wisconsin and Minnesota alike, and it needs to still continue to be.
Okay. I guess the final thing as I talk about issues important to folks in western Wisconsin, and being a person who is working in Minnesota and living in Wisconsin, what about tax reciprocity? Is that something that you want to would work hard at? We've been 3-4 years now without it.
The funny thing is, I actually worked for the Minnesota Department of Revenue when the reciprocity went away.
Okay.
And it affected me as well because I was a Wisconsin, resident working in Minnesota, ironically at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. I think that I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'd like to see it come back.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of issues that are preventing it on both sides, more so on the Minnesota side from what you hear from our own legislative members. And I would agree with I think Dean Knudsen had talked to you about the reciprocity earlier, and he pretty much spelled it out correctly on how he thinks it's not going to happen, although I would like to see it happen.
You have
It's
very
something
little
we need to
control
work on.
over what Minnesota does or
Exactly.
doesn't do.
It's
Right.
what Minnesota accepts and doesn't accept, and I would like to work with them and get them to accept a reciprocity agreement so we can actually get that back.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, and thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Darrell. That's Darrel Laumann, who's a candidate for 30th Assembly District. And if you have any questions, you can go to laumannforoffice.com. Darrell, thanks for being a guest, and folks, thanks for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and keep watching.